All right, we'll get started just a little bit early. I'm sure we'll have some people coming in and out. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you so much for attending this live webinar event. We do apologize for the technical difficulties that we did have last time, and we will be beginning this shortly. In today's connected business landscape, the tides are rising as attacks and potential threat vectors continue to grow. The hackers are now going after vulnerable end users instead of exploiting technology. Many businesses are receiving outside pressures from partners, vendors, and affiliates demanding business compliance and the reporting to go with it. In today's connected markets, your business's reputation is always on the line and your customers are continuing to watch. Based on the older technologies available to us at the time, today's cyberclimate demands greater depth and expertise to fully secure the data used today. It's all of these factors that can affect your vulnerability and network uptime. And as your managed service provider, we will be making 2 new enhancements to our NetCentral secure solutions to address the changing state of cybersecurity. We've made several substantial investments in tools, trainings, and subject matter experts to assist in securing data and address the rapid changes found in today's cyberclimate. With the need for a multi-layered security approach, in today's climate, cybersecurity has become one of the forefronts in demand today for the technology realm. This is where our security education champion, Joy B, joins us. But before I let Joy take over, I have a few housekeeping items before we get started. Number 1, there is also a chat-enabled feature on this webinar as there was the last one. This one should work a little bit more seamlessly. So feel free to add any questions or concerns that you might have into the chat and I can triage them as need be. The slides will be PDF'd and sent out to everybody attending this webinar as a thank you. And also your account manager will be reaching out to you to discuss options around a dark web scan and report. Now, with all of that said, allow me the pleasure of turning this presentation over to Joy. Joy, are you there?
I am here. Kyle, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, super. I want to thank everybody for coming back. If you had already started this with us last week, we have a much better tool that we're using right now, and hopefully this will be a lot more seamless and easy for us as we move along. And I just will quickly introduce myself and we'll get right into it. As Kyle said, that I've been working with Claire Computer Solutions, and my background is that I've actually been in the IT services industry for 22 years now. And I focused strictly on cybersecurity for the past 6 years. So what I did is I aligned myself with the FBI, the LA District Attorney's Office, and the Secret Service Cyber Crimes Unit here in Los Angeles so that I could understand the impact of cybersecurity on the small and medium business environment and really take that with the IT services I was providing to be able to leap forward and address these threats with small businesses in a way that I didn't see that other companies were. So in working with Claire Computer Solutions, I'm very excited to move forward and walk you through what today's criminal landscape looks like in the cyber world and what some of the things are, what some of Claire Computer Solutions packages are doing to address these challenges for us. So I wanted to get started real quick by looking at some statistics. And statistics are really not very fun to look at normally, but I'm going to try and make these kind of digestible and understandable to you. Firstly, you're going to see this quote here that cybercrime is now larger than all other forms of organized crime combined. That is a quote from Michael George, who is the CEO of a worldwide cybersecurity firm that works with managed service providers like Claire Computer Solutions. And This quote was actually pretty astonishing to me when I first heard it, because if you look at what is included in organized crime historically, you're talking about illegal weapons, human trafficking, drugs, everything that has historically propelled organized crime, and looking at cybercrime actually surpassing all of the revenue from other forms of organized crime by 2018 is a pretty big deal. You're looking at the statistic in 2017 there, compiled by the IC3, which is the Internet Complaint Center, and that's a government entity that is sponsored by the FBI. And it shows you in 2017, there was $1.4 billion of revenue generated for organized cybercrime. And I want to have you keep that figure in mind as we move forward here, because when we look at their statistics over time and build in 2018, which is on the far right there, you can see that organized crime in the cyber world actually almost doubled from 2017 to 2018. It's a huge jump. And the reason that we're seeing that is that it's extremely profitable. And the other thing that I think is fascinating about this is that if you look at the bottom line on this bar chart here, you're going to see that the number of complaints steadily rose. There's no skyrocketing happening in the number of complaints that came into the government, but look at the difference in the dollar value of those losses. So what that's telling me is that organized crime is getting even better, so that each time that they are able to permeate a business and extort money financially for that cyber crime, they're able to do it better in a more targeted way and demand more money for it. So this is pretty serious, and it's not going away. The other thing to notice about this chart that you're looking at is that this, in my mind, represents only about 50% of the actual cyber crimes that have happened in the United States. What these statistics are based on are the crimes that are actually reported to the FBI. And as you can imagine, a lot of businesses really don't want to have to report a cybercrime. A couple of reasons. Firstly, it's embarrassing. Secondly, a lot of businesses that might be hit by a cybercrime are interested only in getting that remediated and back online as fast as they possibly can. And there's some concern out there that if you report a crime to the FBI, you may have to withhold from getting your business back online as fast as you can while they conduct their forensics. And then finally, there is some concern about whether or not you would be financially responsible for the leakage of any personally identifiable information that might have happened. And trying to avoid any kind of fines or penalties is another reason that businesses are not reporting those losses. So what you're looking at is really only about half of what's actually happening out there. Now, when we take this dollar value of $2.7 billion at the top of the chart there for 2018 and break it down, let's take a look at what that was actually made up of. Because when we look at the type of crime that compiled into that total of 2.8 billion or 2.7 billion, what we see is that almost 1.3 billion of that was conducted in the form of business email compromise. Now, for those of you who may not know, business email compromise, nearly 4-to-1 in the lead for the type of crime that's being successfully conducted against businesses. And what that means is a credential compromise or a fake phishing email, which means that they have actually pulled a con game in the old-fashioned way of getting somebody to click on something because they think it's legitimate, and that in turn infects their computer or their email mailbox. The second thing on the list there, the confidence fraud / romance, that actually is social engineering. And that's based on the old con game, but it's played via online manipulation now as the newest way to trick people out of their money. So as an industry, what we are looking at is that for the business email compromise, most managed service providers like Claire Computer Solutions and the 32,000 managed service providers across the United States have been moving all of their clients off of their local email servers over the past several years and into different solutions like Office 365 or Google Mail. There's a whole bunch of them out there, but those are the main ones, so that they could help their clients to process their email in a way that is affordable, that's easily accessible from all of their devices. And these cloud email platforms have a lot of benefits to them. But what we are now seeing is that those cloud email platforms are actually fairly easy to compromise and convince people to fraudulently click on things that they didn't intend to click on. And if we take a closer look at that, this article from Forbes magazine dated May 2nd of this year actually shows that 29% of organizations had seen their Office 365 accounts compromised just in the month of March 2019 alone. That's pretty staggering when you think about it. A third of all organizations that have Office 365 accounts. And I want to caution you, some businesses might see this statistic and say, oh man, I'm going to get myself off of the Office 365 platform as fast as I can. Well, those statistics are pretty much mirrored when you look at what's happening on Google Mail and any other kind of cloud providers. And it's not just cloud providers, it's email in general. Email has a capability, since we are all working so fast and furious on our email mailboxes and not paying as much attention to who the actual sender is and what it is that it's asking us to do, it's pretty easy for us to get fooled into clicking on something we shouldn't. And that basically opens Pandora's box. That allows an intruder to get into your system and depending on what their intention is, to deploy all kinds of harmful scenarios against you and your business. So if we were to take another look at this, cyber attacks, the belief system that most small businesses have is that these are really only happening to the big companies. They're not happening to small businesses like mine. That's one of the main things that I wanted to talk about today, because what you see on the news are companies like Wendy's, Whole Foods, Marriott, Home Depot. As I'm putting these logos up, you're probably recognizing quite a few of these. And these are the ones that are indeed newsworthy. But I want to caution you to understand that just because the large enterprise level companies are making the news does not in fact mean that they're the only ones that are being compromised. And interestingly, a lot of these larger companies were compromised via an internet connection that they have with a smaller vendor that they work with. I'm going to take just a second to pick on Target stores. You see them on the left hand in the middle there. And Target actually had been breached by a vendor that they use for their air conditioning company, the heating and cooling company. And the company that they were using, a very small business that had maybe 20 employees, one of their employees had clicked on something in their email that they thought was a legitimate email. And what happened is that the hackers got into the HVAC vendor's computer network and found an Excel spreadsheet on their server called Target Wi-Fi passwords. True story. They opened up that Wi-Fi password and they thought, oh my gosh, well, if we have access to the Target Wi-Fi network to access their air conditioning, heating and cooling, let's go have some fun with that. So they pulled up outside one of the local Target stores, used the spreadsheet to access the Wi-Fi network. And when they thought they were going to be causing some fun havoc with the air conditioning and the heating system, what they actually found as they logged in was that they had access to all of the computers, the payment processing terminals or the credit card terminals, all of the servers, way more information than they should have been able to have access to. And the way that the Target network was designed by their own internal IT company was to have all of the Target stores bridged together via their firewall and what's called a VPN site-to-site connection. So when these guys logged into the Wi-Fi network outside of one Target store, they actually had access to all of the region's Target stores. In discovering what they had access to, of course, they said, well, let's wait till the holiday season. It was about 90 days out. And let's go ahead and capture as many credit cards as we can. So that's how the Target breach happened. It wasn't actually a direct breach into Target. It was a direct breach into one of Target's vendors. And as you all know, myself being an owner of a small business for over 21 years, the way to success as a small to medium business is to get the larger contracts, to constantly be focusing on how can we grow our footprint within our market. And being part of that supply chain and not being secure is basically a deadly thought newadays. So why is it that you're not hearing about the small businesses being attacked? First of all, it's really not newsworthy. If your company is Joe's Plumbing and you get hit with some kind of a cyber breach and you're down for 2 weeks, CBS News is not going to call you up and see if they can come over with their film cameras or their camera crew to interview you and see how this is affecting your business. Only the large regional, enterprise level businesses are the ones that are making the news in that way. Secondly, as I alluded to when we were talking about those FBI statistics, it is extremely embarrassing and horrible PR to admit that you've been attacked and that all of the data on your network was breached successfully. Of course, there might be some legal ramifications behind it if you have any kind of industry compliance and regulations that you're supposed to be adhering to. So small businesses are not talking about it with each other and not seeing it on the media the way that the large enterprise level companies are. And yet they are 58% of the actual targeted businesses. 58% of those breaches are happening to small businesses, not the enterprise level businesses. And it's across all different types of industries. So the major ones that we have here, finance, healthcare, construction, legal, manufacturing, those of course are always making the news, but every different industry is being attacked at this time. It's no longer really zeroing in on one specific industry, although some of those are definitely more lucrative for the cybercrime organizations than other industries. But basically, all industries are under attack. And historical ways of protecting your company's data aren't functioning in the same way that they used to be. I'm going to walk you through a scenario real quick here, one that is near and dear to my heart because it's a scenario that our company actually helped with. And this is a law firm. This happened several years ago, and it was one of the first things that set off all of the red flags in my mind as to how important the cybercrime is to be addressing. So this is a law firm, a small law firm based in the Midwest, and they actually had a ransomware attack happen. They had their own internal IT company or internal IT staff that were helping them. And when they got hit, their IT department said, well, don't worry, even though there's 5 million encrypted files, we have a very robust backup system. And this is something that we've planned and prepared for, and we're going to just zero right in and restore that from backup. But what they discovered when they went to restore the backups is that the bad guys had been in the law firm's network for more than 3 months. The average amount of time, by the way, that cyber criminals are on a network before they are detected is historically 197 days. That's quite a lot of time for them to do recon and to determine the best way that they can cause damage to your business and make the most money. So this company, the law firm, went to restore from their backups, and they realized that the 90-day retention period that they had set for backing up all of the data had been disabled. So the bad guys had basically been on their network, discovered how the backup was being performed, unchecked everything except for the operating system of the server, meaning the data itself was not going to be backed up. And then the bad guys simply waited 90 days for all of the retained and historical backups to be overwritten with no data before they decided to deploy the ransomware. Now, this didn't set off any alarms for the IT department because they were receiving the regular reports that the backup was backing up every night, but they didn't realize that all of the data drives themselves had been deselected from that backup and were now being overwritten with no data. So they didn't have the ability to restore from their backup. IT companies like Claire Computer Solutions, all MSPs across the nation and across the world are having to look at how they've always protected the client businesses and up their game. So what happened is that this law firm went ahead and paid the $25,000 ransom. Now this is back in 2016, and the price of a Bitcoin was dramatically lower. I'm going to say less than 10% of what it is now. By today's terms, the Bitcoin that was demanded in 2016 would have been $250,000 for the encryption keys so that the data could be restored, knowing that they couldn't restore it from their backup. They were down for 2 weeks. Even after they paid the ransom, what they didn't realize is that 5 million encrypted files was actually 12 terabytes of data, and it takes 39 hours per terabyte to restore that data once the attackers were paid. So just relying on backup, or just having the thought of, if I'm attacked, I'm going to go ahead and pay the ransom. Number one, the ransomware, the ransom attackers may not actually give you legitimate keys to restore your data. They don't always do that. Secondly, if they do give you the encryption keys after you pay the ransom, it may take a lot longer, and you don't know if that data is still compromised once it's been restored. So the average cost to a small business is almost $54,000 after a cyber attack. And that's according to a report that was run on 850 businesses within the United States as of March 2019 by an independent third-party company called Vance & Bourne. And that's a fairly average statistic. If you look and do any research on cybersecurity and its effect on small businesses, or cybercrime effect on small businesses, you'll see right around $54,000 is where all of the statistics come out as the actual cost once you've been breached. That may be paying ransomware. It may not. It may be all of the man hours involved and all of the new solutions that you have to secure in order to get your data back or restore you to some semblance of functionality. It may be including lost income, having a full staff sitting there without the ability to do any of their normal day-to-day functions. It may be penalties that you have to pay. There's just several ways that that $54,000 average is comprised, but it is indeed the average for small businesses. So the latest statistics now from the Vance & Bourne report is actually 64% of the cyber attacks are hitting small and medium-sized businesses. I said 58%, and as of March 2019, that has now increased to 64%. So at almost $54,000, you know, as I said, that could be comprised of many different things, but one of the things a lot of businesses are not understanding is how desperately the branding and the reputation is affected. And there are several ways that handling that reputation is critical to your business being able to recover. There are some examples that we have here, you know, like 9 articles in 3 days about a business, a medical practice that was in Athens, Georgia, that kept coming out there and making announcements about their breach and how they were handling it. And the news was just really attacking them because they did such a poor job of it. And the other thing you should know, this is a website that is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and this is one of the HIPAA-related websites. So if your practice happens to be in the medical field in any way, or if you have any kind of HIPAA compliance, you should know that this is what's called the Wall of Shame, and this is out there for everybody to publicly access. I'm calling your attention to this because, well, for a couple of reasons, actually. Firstly, this is sorted just by the state of California, and if you start looking since February of this year of just what fits on this one page, you can see how many businesses month by month are being forced to put on to this website the reporting for what has been breached. And any kind of patients any patients that are researching their medical provider can go to this website to see whether or not they have been breached before they decide to do businesses with them. The second thing, I'm going to actually jump back here real quick. The second thing about this website is that we have the new CCAP regulations for California that are going into effect here. And those privacy regulations are going to function for all businesses in the same way that HIPAA functions for the medical industry. So you might have some questions being based in California about how those CCAP regulations might affect you, and it's important to find out if and how they do affect your business. So some of the historical challenges that we've seen small businesses when they are talking about cybersecurity is that most of the small businesses just don't believe it's going to happen to them. They're looking at the big guys, like I just walked through there, and saying, well, those are the only ones that are being targeted. But we know that actually 64% of the compromises are happening to small businesses now. The second challenge is that a lot of small businesses are thinking that they've got the firewall, they've got the antivirus, they have some kind of a backup solution. And Claire Computer Solutions, for example, has done a great job of, over the years, providing those things that warranted the level of protection that each of you needs. However, the firewall, the antivirus, and the backup solutions is simply not enough based on the types of threats that are happening in today's landscape. The other thing is that a lot of small business owners simply don't believe that their data is important to hackers. You might be sitting there and thinking, well, all I have is a bunch of emails that negotiate some contracts with my clients, or some marketing materials. You know, no hackers are going to log into my network and think that that's valuable. But here's the biggest misconception about that. It doesn't matter if your data is valuable to the hackers. It only matters if your data is valuable to you. So think about that. Can you go without any of your data? Can you go without your email, access to your mailbox, access to your contacts, your calendar, access to your Dropbox or your OneDrive items, access to any of your data? Can you go without access to that data for multiple days? What is your tolerance with that? Is it a week? If you restore from backup and you don't have the last 2 days worth of data, is that okay? How much data do you process on a daily basis, maybe an hourly basis, that is okay to go without before it critically affects the functionality and the profitability of your business? That's what the attackers are relying on. They want to know that you need your data. They don't care what that data actually is most of the time. Now, sometimes they'll look at the data that you hold and see you have a bunch of credit card numbers or health-related data or personal information, credit cards, things like that for your own clients. And they might determine that that's very valuable and turn around and immediately abscond with that data and sell it on the dark web. The other thing that you should consider is whether or not your data is important to your competitors, because espionage indeed is part of what's happening with cybercrime. And then, of course, the final thing is that a lot of small businesses are looking at their IT providers and over the years have developed such a strong relationship with them and have not had any kind of incident. So they have this type of blind trust that, you know, our IT team has always had us covered. So of course they have our backs now. But that's why this conversation is so important. That's why the education behind what's happening with cybersecurity and the risk conversation for your own business is of critical magnitude right now. So based on what's been happening, what we're seeing is that indeed 80% of small business owners that were interviewed in this recent report are starting to look at cybercrime and thinking maybe they do have something to be worried about. And that's why we've been working so closely with Claire Computer Solutions to develop some comprehensive solutions. So how hard is it to actually understand that risk conversation? And that's something that we're going to walk through now. Firstly, you should know we're out to have no geek speak here. We're going to try and speak as plain and simple as we can about how things have changed and what the solutions are that we are looking at for you. Firstly, the way that the data liability is being viewed is something that needs to be kind of reframed. On the top right, you have the data owner, and that's you. Historically now, the data owner and the information team have worked together in only those two entities to determine how do we protect your data and what needs to be protected. In today's landscape, the data owner needs to understand that they are the ones that definitely carry all of the liability, because they are the ones that are establishing the budget and the allocation for what it is that needs to be protected. The information technology team takes those budget numbers and those solutions and implements them in the way that they have been trained to help protect the data owner. What's happened now is that there's a third piece of that pie called the information security team. And that is the new skill set and the new solutions that Claire Computer Solutions has been working on to bring to you the ability to have a conversation around, let's look at what kind of risk you have and how we can best mitigate that risk based on what today's current threat landscape is. They then give that information to the data owner for a new conversation to happen around what kind of budget should we be allocating and where exactly does the most risk lie in your business. Because you want to be affordable and you want to be comprehensive and protecting the things that matter the most. So let's have that conversation, but let's do it in a way that is easy for you to understand. I'm going to give you an analogy of a home, because everybody has a home, whether it's a condo, an apartment, a residential home, a van by the river. I have no judgment here, but everybody has a home, right? Carl, you have a home. Why don't you walk through this with me?
Okay.
Tell me, in your home, what is valuable for you to be protecting?
I love photography, so I have a bunch of old school vintage cameras, some records, pictures, that kind of thing.
Awesome.
Memento
Awesome.
stuff.
What else would you be protecting in your home?
I'd probably be protecting maybe like some personal information from going into the wrong hands.
Yeah, like maybe tax returns or copies of any kinds of banking agreements that you've signed that have account numbers on them.
Exactly.
And electronics, like as you said, those kinds of things are always the first things that people say. Their own family, for example. How about jewelry? Making sure that family heirlooms are protected, things like that. So everybody has things that they identify, and it's different for each person, really. There's some commonalities, but everybody has a different list of what do they consider to be the most valuable thing in their home. And then in order to protect those things in their homes, what kinds of things would you use, Kyle?
I use a safety lockbox that's fireproof and crush proof up to so many, I think, PSI or pressure. I also use, just the standard doors, window shades, insurance, alarms, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So everybody has different components that they would add in to protect the things that are valuable to them. A lot of this might be based on where you're located, how valuable those things are. But all of these things that we're seeing pop up on the screen are different ways that people have historically made sure that their home and their valuables are protected, right? So if we're looking at this and we say, all right, well, what if we were to give it this kind of a view? Everything that we have on the left-hand column is meant to protect those items in our home. So you want to take steps to make sure that somebody is not able to even enter the home, right? Those would be the doors, the windows, the locks, making sure that you educate your kids. Honey, when you come home, be sure you lock the door behind you, putting up the neighborhood watch, yard signs, things like that, right? Now, once somebody's actually inside your home, if they don't belong there, you have different things that are meant to detect an intrusion. And those would be the motion sensors, the alarms, you have the cameras on there. Other neighbors are watching and see somebody enter your home that shouldn't be. But at this point, they're already in your home. Once they're already in your home, what do you want to do? You want to try to respond to that in a way that's going to get them out of that home as fast as you can. So you have dogs barking, you have police coming, you've got a baseball bat underneath the bed that you're grabbing. It's kind of funny because when I do this talk in Dallas, we swap out baseball bat for a gun or a rifle. It just depends on where you are. But everyone has different ways of responding to an actual intrusion in their home. So what we did at the beginning of this exercise is we identified what kinds of things are the most valuable to you. Then we walked through what kind of steps would you take to protect, detect, and respond to any kind of threat against those things that are the most valuable. And then finally, you would want to be able to recover, right? Recover any of those things that have been stolen or have been threatened. And so what you're looking at now are the five pillars that were put together by NIST. And so NIST is a government entity. And it's actually a framework of cybersecurity that was developed back in 2013 for the nation's critical infrastructure. But you can imagine it being designed for the nation's critical infrastructure and then applied to large enterprise businesses. It was pretty hard to digest and reduce to a way that was manageable to look at best practices for small businesses. But that's exactly what we've had to do now in cybersecurity. And Claire Computer Solutions is looking at this NIST framework as a way of being able to walk you through that risk conversation. So we just looked at this in a way that relates to your home. And if we were to look at it now in a way that relates to your business, we would see that what that means is that we would walk through each of the different departments and identify with that department what kind of assets or digital assets do you have that are the most important to be restored in case of a cyber breach. And in that exercise, what we generally find is that a company's finance department, for example, would have server files that are archived, regular files that they use on a day-to-day basis, Office 365 or some kind of an email platform that they use to interact with other businesses, some kind of a enterprise level accounting software system, and of course, how they track all of their customer information. And you can see from left to right, the order of the criticality. If something were to happen to that data, what would be the most important to have restored the fastest? And that's how you determine on a heat map, if you will, what's the most high risk and what's the most low risk types of data and digital assets that you have, so that we know how to design, using that NIST framework, the best way to do the identification and then protect, detect, respond, and recover for your specific data for your business. Does that make sense? So that's how the risk conversation rolls out. So now we're going to move into understanding in the risk conversation something as simple as the dark web. The dark web is a really good starting point for most businesses to understand what actually happens to data when it's stolen and sold and used for nefarious purposes. So in order to demonstrate this, I'm going to walk through an example of what the internet actually looks like, because most people don't really understand the difference between the internet that they use on a day-to-day basis and then the deep web and the dark web. But this is a very good visual graphic that I found that can help to represent that for you. So most of you as business owners are going to be looking at the surface web and identifying different types of websites you might use on a daily basis. So a lot of us have these web platforms that we're constantly using browsers to access. You log in, you've got your username, your password, and now you're accessing what we see through normal browsers. So whether that's Google Chrome, Mozilla, Internet Explorer, Safari on Mac devices, it doesn't matter. These are easy to access on those types of devices using those types of browsers. What you see in the deep web section there are the types of data that is stored behind a protected barrier like a username and a password. So you would be accessing your email, your medical records, financial records, if you have like QuickBooks Online, right? Being able to submit to the government any of your uploading reports on a regular basis if you're any kind of a government contractor. Being able to access specific databases. All of that is meant to be behind a company firewall of some kind that's gated with a username and a password. And what happens is that access to those types of deep web repositories gets compromised because the username and the password gets stolen up at the surface web level. And that happens in a lot of different ways, but the most common way is that somebody receives an email, clicks on a link that they shouldn't click on, and now the username and password that they're entering as they're using their browser to access different websites is actually being recorded. That username and password to access the deep web types of resources is now being filtered down into the dark web in a separate layer of internet connectivity that cannot be accessed by a normal browser. That's where the bad guys, the hackers, are storing the usernames and the passwords and putting them up for sale and it's where a lot of other nefarious activity happens as well. So originally, the dark web was designed and developed by the US government many years ago as a means of secure communications that couldn't be identified on the normal internet. That, of course, was discovered by other entities like nation states, and they started to use it for their own purposes. It's not always used for bad purposes. It's important to understand the dark web is still used for legitimate transactions and communications, sometimes for political protests, for example, with countries that don't allow normal communications and everything is filtered through the country's firewalls. But that is also the birthplace of a lot of drug trafficking and all of the cybercrime and illegal activities. So what happens is those credentials are being sold on the dark web, and then they're brought up and they're peppered against all of the surface web type of websites to see what other websites can they gain access to, or data repositories, financial institutions, for example, using those same credentials. Now, the record, this is getting faster and faster for when a username and password is stolen on the surface web, sold on the dark web, and then started to pepper against all kinds of online resources to see what you can get access to, especially corporate networks. And the record now stands at only 19 minutes between a Russian hacker getting somebody's username and password, selling it on the dark web, grabbing that, and then being able to access a corporate network using that same username and password. So there's a couple of lessons to be learned here. Number one, don't ever use the same exact username and password across more than one website or repository for any kind of digital access. And then number two, there should always be some kind of monitoring set up so that you know if your company's email addresses are being sold with matching passwords on the dark web, that you're immediately notified. What that looks like is called a dark web report. I'm showing you an example of one here. This is a legitimate report that I just ran recently. And this report is going to give you the exact email address for your own company. So if your company's URL or email address is bobsplumbing.com and the email address would be bob@bobsplumbing.com, every email address that ends in bobsplumbing.com would be reported on this report for that specific company. The actual password that is being sold on the dark web is included in this report. Now, for the purpose of this visual walkthrough, I grayed out with asterisks the rest of that password, but on the dark web report, we have access to the actual password if the actual password is being sold, the date that it was published, and then, of course, what kind of breach source did that come from? So some of the more common ones we see, Adobe is very recent. They just again got hacked once in October of 2016, and I don't know if you heard in the news, just maybe 5 days ago, they were hacked again. So all Adobe usernames and passwords are now being sold again on the dark web. But also companies like Dropbox, Evite, a lot of very commonly used public companies. And the purpose of this type of reporting and monitoring is that the minute one of your email addresses being detected as being sold on the dark web, you're notified. So number one, you can change that email address and see what kind of damage might have been caused before it's being used to cause a lot of damage to your company. And then number two, you'll have the ability to see if that same username and password is being used on any other websites that you forgot to change. You can go back now and change them on those websites before that damage is caused. But it's pretty common that these company reports have a lot of entries on them that most businesses don't even know are out there being sold. So one of the neat things about this webinar today is that Claire Computer Solutions has run one of these reports for each of you and is going to be reviewing it with you after this webinar. So here's the good news. Cybersecurity is a business problem that we can and we will be solving together. In order for Claire Computer Solutions to do this, they have secured the services of working with their own security operations center. And this is great news for you, because the ability of a security operations center combined with the staff that you know and love over at Clear Computer Solutions is going to be the secret ingredient you need to actually have 24/7 monitoring and immediate remediation of any kind of cyber threats that may come your way. So the way that that's going to work is that there's a new set of tools and solutions that Clear Computer is going to be introducing to you. And the NetCentral Secure is the package name. And what that does is it uses tools that deploy a lot of new automation. So it can immediately detect suspicious behavior, quarantine that. The Security Operations Center, or what I'm going to refer to as the SOC, is going to immediately be notified if there's any suspicious behavior happening, determine whether or not it needs to be investigated. And this is filtering out thousands, hundreds of thousands of alerts on a daily basis for the ones that actually require further investigation and perhaps immediate reaction and remediation. Looking through the history of what exactly is happening in that suspicious behavior so that they can understand the best way to keep it on the radar, to immediately remediate it, or to roll back your actual computers or your servers so that you can get right back to work. And when I say roll back, this is a really impressive solution. What we have been seeing is an average of 1 hour from a time of a complete ransomware attack, for example, on a server that has encrypted all the files, to being able to get everything restored and back to work again. 1 hour. It's a really impressive solution. So looking at that, let's take a look at one of the two packages and how it's going to be working for you. The first is the NetCentral Secure Advanced Endpoint Security. Now, endpoint means your computers, your actual devices that you're using to be accessing all of the data and the digital assets that you work with on a daily basis. The way that this works is that it's a 3-stage attack and protection. The first is that it's going to be detecting threats before they're even allowed to be deployed on your computers. And by threat detection, we don't mean the normal way that antivirus has functioned historically for you. It does all the things that antivirus always has done, but antivirus is not anti-malware, and antivirus works off of what is considered to be a huge database of known threats or known files that cause malicious activity. So antivirus would compare a file coming in or a behavior coming in to that known list and say, oh, I'm going to block you. I'm not going to let you happen. The difference between virus tools and what's being deployed with the advanced endpoint security is that this is actually detecting threats based on behavior. It's a completely different type of a scenario. So this is able to take a look at what is actually happening at the time that it's happening in the way that the behavior is developing underneath the surface of your computer. So this is using some automated intelligence and looking at a storyline of, well, if we know that Outlook can only do 26 things, but we just saw a 27th behavior that Outlook normally would not do, we're going to immediately set off an alarm and have the Security Operations Center look at what that behavior is and look through the storyline of what it's trying to do to determine whether or not this is a legitimate threat. So it functions completely differently than antivirus historically would. The benefit to using this as well is that after any kind of a threat may get through the system, because there is no such thing as 100% guarantee that anything would never get through the system, you have the ability to conduct in-depth forensics with the Security Operations Center, remediate it, and roll it back, as I was saying, within generally about an hour to get you functioning again. And the during and the after period is completely managed by the Security Operations Center. So that is a huge benefit and a big game changer compared to the historic way of using simple antivirus measures to protect your business. The next thing that they're doing is folding in a layer with the advanced endpoint security that's going to address the business email compromise. At the outset of this, we were talking about those huge statistics. $1.2 billion of the cybercrime is being generated just from business email compromise. So Claire Computer Solutions has looked at this with the Security Operations Center and said, how can we design a way for us to be notified immediately if there's some kind of a compromise on our clients' Office 365 environments? And this is just a brilliant way of attacking this, because what it does is it goes into the Office 365 accounts for each of the Claire Computer Solutions client Office 365 tenants and compares a list of 6 of the most common indicators of business email compromise to immediately alert if any of these happen. So for example, if there's a leak credential being sold on the dark web associated with Office 365 specifically, if there's a sign-in from a computer that is using an IP address or an internet connection that is known to be malicious, an example of that might be a IP address based out of China or based out of Russia into an Office 365 account, that immediately sets off a flag, right? If there is malware already being detected on the device and it's logging into Office 365, that sets off an alert. Impossible travel. So if you're located in San Jose, California, and you log into your Office 365 account, and 7 minutes later, that same Office 365 account is being logged into from Cabo San Lucas, they're going to say, wait a minute, in 7 minutes, you can't get from San Jose to Cabo San Lucas. That's going to set off an immediate flag that there might be something nefarious happening with that account. So those are the 6 most common ways of indicating that there's some kind of compromise happening, and that is bundled into the Advanced Endpoint Security package. The second thing that we're doing at Claire Computer Solutions is taking a look at the network itself. And when we say network, overall, the infrastructure, what we're talking about is those firewalls and those servers that are going to be the hardest things to monitor the hundreds of thousands of alerts that come through them on a regular basis, to identify which of those actually are ones that need to be actionable, as well as analyze and retain for forensics purposes. So what we do is we have the ability to put an agent on the network that's going to monitor all the traffic through the routers and the firewalls, the servers, some of the switches that may have the capability to do that kind of packet monitoring, and if necessary, in rare situations, the desktops themselves. So the Security Operations Center is going to be collecting the logs and filtering them using very advanced intelligence in all of the tools that they have to identify out of 120 million log-in events, recordings that are happening on an immediate basis, which ones of those are generating alerts that need to be reviewed, and of those alerts, which ones would be classified as needing to be looked into further, and then which ones actually need to have action taken on them because they've been identified as a real threat. Now, the network security package is extremely important if you actually have any kind of security mandate or government mandate, government compliance like HIPAA or PCI compliance. Those are a couple of the ones that you would want to have this component so that you can go back and prove, if you were to be audited, that you are complying in the way that you're supposed to with those things. And also point of information with the new California regulations, the CCAP that will be coming into effect, this may become more of a necessity than an option for a lot of other businesses soon. So it's something that Claire Computer Solutions is looking at and taking advantage of learning and utilizing for their clients where it makes sense, well in advance of that becoming a mandate from California law, just in case that's what's going to be happening. So you can see that there's 2 robust solutions that we are rolling out, backed by a 24/7 Security Operations Center. And it all starts with something as simple as taking a look at, do you understand what your risk is with all of the digital assets that you have? What would be the most important to protect? And how would you position your own security if you knew exactly what was already being sold on the dark web? That's the purpose of this webinar and the conversation that Claire Computer Solutions is looking to have with you. So I know that I just distilled a whole bunch of information to you and walked through a lot of stuff. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a pause and we're going to see if there's any questions that you want to put into the chat window. And then we're going to have Carl come on and talk with us about what the next steps are.